The hogs were screaming again. That god-awful sound rolled down the slope just before sunrise, scraping across the trees and skipping like a curse over the frost. A squeal like that never meant just feeding time. It meant rot. It meant death. It meant another settler's mistake had come to claim its toll before breakfast. Martha didn't flinch at the sound. She was elbow-deep in frozen earth, kneeling just outside her cabin, her wool skirt soaked through with melting frost. Her breath curled from her lips in soft steam as she dragged the last flat stone into place, sealing off the narrow entrance she'd built into the slope behind her home. No one but her knew how deep it went, and no one ever asked. They just laughed, said her hole in the ground was wasted time, called it the widow's tomb once, when they passed on horseback and saw her hauling buckets of clay and stones out with her sleeves rolled and her face set hard. But their laughter had gotten quieter since October. Now it came in glances, half smirks. No one said much about it anymore, not since the first snow hit early and hard, and 2 neighbors lost their entire preserves to early spoil. Not since Mrs. Harrow's root cellar caved in. Not since the preacher's wife opened a barrel of salted pork only to find it green, crawling with flies, sealed under mold like a coffin left out in the sun. Now they mostly just watched, quietly. But Martha had never built it for show, and she hadn't built it for pride. She'd built it the night her husband died, when her hands were still shaking too hard to hold the baby and her belly was still too hollow to cry. She built it because she knew what cold could take, and winter was only just beginning. She'd moved to the frontier with nothing but a mule, a child that hadn't lived through the ride, and a man who only lived long enough to dig the first post holes of their dream. He'd taken a bad fall, frozen mud, fractured spine, and died without saying a word. Left her with a shovel, a patch of trees, and neighbors who smiled like they pitied her until their backs were turned. She didn't go to church, didn't gossip, didn't beg. That made them uneasy. Instead, she built, one log at a time, then the cabin, then the fire pit, then the chimney, half stone, half patched with clay. Then she started digging. She picked the north side slope, just behind her home, where the sun barely touched in the dead of winter, and the soil stayed dark and packed. For weeks she worked late into the cold evenings, digging until her palms bled and her boots cracked at the sole. When the wind howled and others stayed warm with company, she kept at it by lantern light, shoveling quietly as the woods froze around her. She lined the walls with stone she gathered herself, fitted them with care, laid a double roof, 1 timber, 1 clay, buried it under 2 feet of soil, built narrow stairs downward and a flat stone door to seal it in. Inside, she drove hooks into beams, laid out low racks, and even a stone shelf near the back for the buttercrock she hoped to afford come spring. By the time snow arrived, it was colder than a well, but dry as bone. She stocked it with what little she had: salt pork, turnips, potatoes, and a small clay jar of honey she'd taken as trade from a passing trader. It was nothing fancy, but it was hers, and it would keep. By mid-November, the other cabins were already in trouble. The Harrows' salt beef turned brown. The Petersons' apples froze to mush in the root cellar that hadn't been vented properly. The Sullivans' entire load of cornmeal had gone bitter from damp. Each time, someone would ride into town in the early hours, bundled and panicked, hoping to buy back what they could from the general store. But the shelves were thinning fast. With the stage stuck in the pass and no fresh freight in 2 weeks, there wasn't much left but pickled eggs and regrets. Martha didn't ride to town. She didn't need to. She still had what she'd buried, and when she pulled it out, it was cold but whole, dry, untouched. She ate quiet, slow meals beside her fire: boiled turnips, thin strips of salted meat, and fresh bread baked with the last of her flour. And when the wind screamed through the trees, she leaned back and listened to the hogs squeal again, further down the hill, knowing full well they wouldn't last another week. The first time anyone asked her for help, it wasn't with words. It was the preacher's wife, knocking with her knuckles stiff and pale, eyes a little too wide and cheeks hollowed by quiet worry. She didn't beg, didn't cry, just said they'd misjudged the frost and the barrel hadn't kept. She offered to trade a patchwork quilt and a small crucifix carved by her son. Martha didn't blink. She nodded once, disappeared into the slope behind her home, and emerged with a slab of pork still wrapped in its dry cloth. The woman stared at it like it was gold. "You can come back in 2 days," Martha said, and closed the door. After that, they stopped laughing entirely. A week passed, then 2. Snow came heavy, then sleet, then nights so cold the air cracked when breathed too hard. Cabins creaked, chimneys froze over, and the general store boarded shut after someone stole the last crate of coffee and a sack of oats. Martha lit her lantern and carried it down into the cold earth, where her pantry stayed dry, her supplies stayed firm, and not a single mouse had dared dig through. She'd learned, after all: stone floors, no clay walls, venting but tight-fitting, never too deep, never too shallow, just deep enough to hold the frost like a secret. And in the dark, she whispered her own prayers, not to God, but to the woman she used to be, the one who hadn't known what death could take. She thanked her for digging, because now, every knock at the door came softer, more desperate, and her food was still safe. The knocks came, or more often after that, soft at first, polite. A quiet tap just before dusk, like maybe they didn't want others to see. But as December sank its teeth into the valley, the sounds grew harder, louder, urgent. By the second week, Martha stopped asking who it was. The faces rotated like shadows on a dial. Preacher's wife again. Then young Thomas Hall, barely 17 and grey with cold. Then the Norris boy, holding out a tin mug with no explanation. Even Mr. Jacobson came one evening, tall hat in hand, and pride swallowed so far down his throat it looked like it nearly killed him to speak. "My wife's coughing blood," he said. "A warm meal might—" He didn't finish the sentence. Martha nodded. She always nodded. Took no payment, asked no questions, just ducked into the slope and returned with whatever she could spare. A strip of dried meat, a biscuit wrapped in cloth, a small crock of preserved carrots, sometimes even a pinch of salt measured carefully. They left. Silent, ashamed, but grateful. She'd built the pantry for herself, but now it fed half the valley, and yet no one offered to help her chop wood. No one patched her roof. No one brought her extra nails, nor asked how her own health held through the storms. Their respect came with limits. She was still the widow, still odd, still someone they could accept help from, but not someone they could quite say thank you to without feeling a sting in their own pride. That was fine. Martha didn't want their pity. She wanted her land to survive the freeze. She wanted her firewood to stay dry, her roof to hold, and her pantry to remain untouched by mice, damp, or envy. But envy had a way of sneaking in colder than any frost, and it came first through the eyes of a boy. Eli Harrow had always been a watcher. He was 14, lanky, all elbows and suspicion, and from the day his family's root cellar flooded, he'd made a quiet habit of trailing Martha from a distance, especially when she ventured beyond the trees. She noticed him once, standing behind a black pine near the creek as she hauled up a bucket of ice. His coat was too big, his eyes too sharp. "You hungry?" she asked. He didn't answer. "Then go home. This freeze'll steal your toes if you let it." He vanished like smoke, but the next week she found fresh tracks near the back slope, small boots in the snow, circling her pantry entrance. And not just once, multiple days, from different directions. Someone had been snooping. She reinforced the stone lid, made the latch quieter, less visible. She started carrying a hatchet tucked into her belt, not for show, but just in case, because hunger could twist a boy, and envy even more so. 3 days before Christmas, the McIntyre cabin burned to the ground. No one knew if it was the chimney or the spilled lamp oil, maybe both. All that was left were wet ashes, and a family of 6 pressed into the old schoolhouse for shelter, shivering under every coat they could find. Their food stores had been in the cabin, barrels of lard, oats, jerky, and dried beans, all gone in an hour. The schoolteacher, Miss Trudy, came knocking the next morning, tears in her lashes and voice trembling. "I don't ask for me," she said, "just the children. The littlest one's gone pale, and her mama's not doing much better." Martha gave her butter, real butter, from the crock she'd kept near the cold wall in her pantry. She wrapped it in burlap and placed it gently into Trudy's shaking hands. "You'll need to use it quick," Martha said. "Won't keep out there." That butter had been worth more than gold. Traded at any other time, it might have earned her a full week of supplies. But she didn't blink, and that act was what made the whispers begin. "She's got more down there," they said. "I seen the lantern glow late past midnight. She's still digging. Who keeps butter in a hole and don't sell it? She's not starving like the rest of us. That pantry's unnatural." The word unnatural spread faster than frostbite. Mrs. Norris muttered it to the tailor. The tailor whispered it to the man who ran the post. The postman told his wife, who told the Jacobsons. And suddenly the same neighbors who once knocked softly now eyed her pantry like it was cursed or charmed. Something unholy, something not rightly earned. They couldn't explain it. And what folks can't explain, they try to tear down. It happened the night of the blizzard. Winds screamed down the slope like wolves. Snow drove sideways, thick and sharp as broken glass. The air stung every breath, and the forest moaned with weight. Trees bowed under their own bones, chimneys clogged, roofs cracked, and still 3 shadows moved in the dark toward Martha's slope. She was awake, hadn't slept in days, not with the storm pounding like a drum and her bones aching from firewood duties. She was mending a pair of mittens when, She heard the crunch, 3 steps, then a scrape, then another. She didn't light the lantern, didn't speak, just reached for her coat, pulled the hatchet from the door frame, and eased the door open without sound. Snow hit her like a slap. She stepped out into the white and followed the tracks. Fresh prints, 2 large, 1 small. They led straight behind her cabin, right to the pantry lid, and there, frozen in the act of lifting the flat stone cover, were 3 figures, 2 men, 1 boy. Eli Harrow stared at her first, eyes wide with terror. The 2 men turned slowly. One was Jacobson, the other was Hall, the boy's father. No one spoke. No one had to. The guilt on their faces was carved deeper than any frostbite. But their hunger, their pride, their need had overridden whatever decency the cold hadn't already stolen. She didn't raise the hatchet. She didn't scream. She just stared. Let the silence drag. Let the wind fill the space between them. And then, finally, she leaned down slowly, gripped the lid, and slammed it shut, so hard the snow jumped from the trees. "Don't come back," she said. "Next time, I won't be this kind." Jacobson's mouth moved, but no words came. Hall touched his son's shoulder and turned. The 3 vanished into the storm like shame incarnate. No one visited for days. The cold deepened. Frost turned trees to glass. The schoolhouse chimney collapsed, and the McIntyres were forced to share space with the preacher's family, crammed into a single-bedroom cabin with no insulation and 1 blanket apiece. Word spread that the Jacobsons had tried to ration snow water and burned books to stay warm. The Harrows, someone whispered, had nothing but boiled pine needles and floor scraps left to chew. But no one knocked. Not now, not after the storm, because now they feared her. Or maybe they feared the part of themselves that had stood in the snow, ready to steal from a woman who'd fed them. Either way, they stayed. Silent, and Martha didn't mind. She rationed herself, never taking more than needed, cooked only what the fire would hold, and each day she walked the pantry entrance, checking for footprints, checking the stone, brushing away snow. Her pantry stayed dry, her food stayed whole, and while every other cabin fought back against mold, rot, collapse, or hunger, hers stood firm, anchored by the cold earth and the choices she'd made when no one had believed in her. But winter wasn't over, and one morning in early January, just as the sky turned that pale frozen blue that meant even colder nights ahead, she woke to find something she'd never seen before. The pantry door ajar, stone half lifted, a smear of blood in the snow, and footprints leading not away, but deeper into the woods. The prints were small, sloppy, blood-dotted but not gushing, not a wound that would fell a man, more the type left by a gash opened on the hand or foot, maybe where frostbite peeled back a layer of skin, or a nail had ripped while trying to pry something open. But they were fresh, too fresh, still wet in the snow, and leading somewhere no settler in their right mind went in the deep winter. Martha stood above them with the wind biting her cheeks, one hand tightening on the lantern, the other gripping the handle of her hatchet so hard her knuckles ached. Someone had broken into her pantry, not stolen yet, but the door had been opened, and someone had fled. Worse, they'd fled into the woods, not toward a cabin, not toward safety, into the dark and the trees and the bone-deep cold. She should have turned back, locked the stone, sealed it tight and waited for the next storm to cover the tracks. No food had gone missing, she'd already counted. The hooks were still full, the buttercrock sealed. Not a single rack shifted, nor jar cracked. Whatever had scared them off, it had worked. But she couldn't ignore the blood or the size of those prints, too small to be a grown man, too erratic to be someone thinking clearly, a child, or someone close to it, and that chilled her more than the wind ever could. She layered on what she had, wool coat, scarf, the gloves with the mended fingertips, and tucked 2 biscuits in a cloth inside her pocket. Not because she planned to be gone long, but because she knew what it meant when someone vanished into these woods in January. They wouldn't last the night. She followed the trail without a word, without telling anyone, because she already knew what the neighbors would say. Let 'em freeze, let 'em learn. She was owed silence after all they'd done, wasn't she? But something in her, the part that had once clutched a dead baby to her chest on the trail west, the part that had built her pantry with fingers numb from grief, wouldn't allow her to walk away. The prints weaved, crossed a narrow stream twice, looped once near a downed birch. Then 1/2 mile in, they paused. A small bundle of cloth lay caught in a snowdrift, a child's scarf. Brown with red edging, handmade, old, she knew it. Martha bent down, turned it in her fingers. Jacobson's boy, Eli. She nearly swore aloud. He was the last one she wanted to find in this state. The same boy who'd stood beside her pantry, eyes wide with stolen hunger. The one who'd trailed her silently for weeks. And yet, he was still a child, and something about the haphazard loops in the snow told her he wasn't just stealing food anymore. He was running from someone or towards something. She picked up the pace, the prints now ragged, closer together, as if he'd begun to limp. The blood had stopped, a good sign or a terrible one. Hard to tell. The wind sharpened. trees thinned. Then she saw it, a small lean-to, half collapsed, more like brush and sticks thrown into the shape of shelter than something built with care. At first glance, it seemed empty, but there was smoke, a thin, wavering line rising from beneath a mound of snow near the base of the shelter. A hollowed stump smoked like a chimney. She could hear movement inside, soft, uneven breathing. She crouched, hatchet ready, called low. Eli, silence, then a cough, weak, childish. "Ms. Martha?" He sounded surprised, ashamed. "I'm here," she said. "You're not in trouble." The brush rustled. He emerged slowly, wrapped in a thin blanket, cheeks chapped raw, lips cracked. One hand was swaddled in fabric already stiff with blood. The other clutched a tin cup. "I didn't take nothing," he said, voice breaking. "Didn't even eat. I just wanted to see it, to know if it was real. And then I saw Pa watching, so I ran. I thought he'd—" His voice trailed off. Martha's heart didn't soften, not yet, but she crouched beside him. "You're bleeding," she said. He nodded. "I tried to climb the stone from the back, slipped, caught a nail or something. Wasn't thinking." She reached out, took the hand carefully. It was a shallow cut, half frozen already, painful but survivable. "You'll lose the fingers if you stay out here. I can't go back." "Why not?" He looked at her then, eyes glossy, not from cold, from shame. "They said it was my fault, that I told people about your place, that I got others jealous. Pa hit me, said I'd better make it right, that I should have taken something, proved it was real, showed them before they came, said I should have broken in before it got sealed again." Martha inhaled once, slowly. "They sent you to steal from me." He shook his head. "They said I should fix what I started. I wasn't supposed to get caught, just get in and back out." She stood, paced once. "You came out here thinking what, exactly?" Eli looked down. "I figured I'd run for a day or two, let 'em cool off, maybe find a trapper's trail, make my way somewhere. I didn't plan on the cold getting this bad. It's not going to get better, I know." A pause. The wind hissed between trees. Then she asked, "Did you tell anyone you were going?" "No." That was the first good news she'd heard all morning. She took him back, not because he deserved it, but because she knew what it meant to be alone in the cold, with a body too small to fight back, and hands too raw to hold a weapon. She gave him one biscuit from her coat pocket as they walked, told him not to talk. He didn't. When they reached the cabin, she ushered him in, stripped off his outer coat, and rubbed his hands raw to get the circulation back. He didn't cry, not once, just flinched and bit down when the blood started to move again. "You'll sleep in the loft," she said, "and you'll eat what I give you. No wandering, no questions. You so much as look at the pantry without my say-so, I'll toss you out, and the wolves can finish what your pa started." He nodded, wide-eyed. She believed him, but still, she watched, slept with her boots on, hatchet by the bed. For 3 nights, the boy barely moved. Then, on the 4th morning, there was a knock, 3 sharp raps. Too confident for a neighbor begging for food, too casual for someone seeking help. Martha opened the door slowly. Jacobson stood there, hat in hand, gun on his belt, smile carved on his face like a wound. Jacobson didn't look cold. That was the first thing Martha noticed. His cheeks weren't red from wind, no frost crusted his collar, and the snow on his shoulders hadn't had time to settle. He hadn't come far, which meant he already knew where to go, which meant he'd been watching. "I heard you might have taken in my boy," he said, voice easy like honey gone thick in the jar. She said nothing. He glanced past her shoulder, into the dark cabin behind her, where Eli, if he had any sense at all, was still tucked away in the loft, hidden from view. "Wife's worried sick," Jacobson went on. "We thought he wandered too far in the storm. Figured maybe a bear, or one of them cougars." He let the words linger. "Imagine our surprise when someone said they saw him heading this way." She met his eyes. "You beat him for telling the truth." He smiled tighter. "I disciplined a boy for making up fairy tales about magic holes in the ground while folks were starving. You told him to break into my pantry." He shook his head, slow. "We told him to see if it was real. That's different." "No," she said. "It isn't." Another pause. Jacobson's smile never changed, but his fingers twitched once on the rim of his hat. His boots shifted in place, a show of patience, not nerves. She knew men like this, built their strength from the failures of others, saw apology as weakness, saw women alone as an opportunity. "You holding him in there?" he asked, leaning just slightly to one side. "He's resting. You know, I got every right to take my son home." "No," she said again. "You had that right before you sent him out to freeze for your pride." Jacobson's jaw worked once. Then he stepped back from the door and turned his gaze toward the slope. "It's impressive, what you built. Real clever. That pantry of yours. It's got the whole valley talking. Folks say it's the only reason anyone's still alive down here." Martha didn't reply. Jacobson's voice dipped a little lower. A lot of mouths to feed, and you got more food than you know what to do with. I've never kept a mouth from food if it came asking with honesty, he chuckled. You make that sound noble, but it's pride all the same. You give when it suits you. We need more than scraps from your table, widow. We need to share in it, properly. You mean take it. I mean, stop pretending one woman with a shovel and a few stones gets to survive while others don't. His face changed then. Not ugly, not violent, just settled, calm. I got 4 families ready to back me. You give us half the stores. We'll forget this whole thing with the boy. He comes home. You keep your cabin. You keep half your food. That's fair. She leaned against the doorframe. You come back with those men, she said. You'll be walking home alone. Jacobson squinted. That a threat? No, she said. It's a warning. Then she shut the door in his face. She didn't watch him go. Didn't need to. She knew the sound of retreating boots on packed snow well enough. And sure enough, hours later, when she cracked the shutter just enough to spy the trail below, she saw him moving toward the Harrow cabin, then later the Petersons. And finally, as dusk fell, she saw 6 figures, men bundled in wool and wrapped in pride, gather at the edge of the schoolhouse where firewood smoke rose like a beacon of their desperation. She had a day, maybe 2. They would wait for the next storm to cover their tracks, and then they'd come, not to beg, not to barter, to take. You understand what's happening? She asked Eli that night, while the wind picked up again beyond the walls. He nodded. He'd heard enough from the loft. I ain't going back, he whispered. Not even if they drag me. You're not going anywhere, she said. But you need to help. Anything. She pulled a box from beneath the hearth. Inside, nails, some leftover barbed wire, iron scraps, and a small sack of gunpowder she'd traded off a passing trapper 2 winters ago. You know how to use a hammer? She asked. He nodded, eyes wide. Good, she said. Then let's make sure they remember who they're dealing with. They worked until their fingers cracked. First, she rigged the stone pantry lid with a second latch, one that locked from inside. Then she moved half the dry goods down into the cold cellar below the pantry shelf, a space barely 2 feet high that only she knew existed, buried beneath a false layer of floorboards and gravel. The rest she packed into canvas sacks and stowed in the crawl space under the cabin. Nothing remained visible on the racks. Then she sealed the pantry, as if she hadn't been there at all. Let them think it's empty, she told the boy. Desperation turns men blind, but if they open it and find nothing, it buys us time. Time for what? To decide what they're willing to burn for a lie. She wasn't ready to kill them, not yet, but she was ready to make them bleed. She set tripwire across the slope, hidden under loose snow, set sharpened sticks angled downhill, just enough to pierce boots, rigged bells from fishing line and iron scraps in the brush so she'd hear anyone approaching. Eli helped. He didn't flinch once. When she asked if he was scared, he said, "They stopped being my people the day they left me in the snow." That made her pause, because she remembered the day she became something other than one of them too, and it hadn't been as dramatic. It had just been a silence, a gap in the way others smiled, a refusal to help bury her husband, a moment where no one said anything while her baby turned blue in her arms and she had to dig the grave alone. That was all it took. That was what made her a widow before her time. The storm came, heavy and loud. Wind battered the shutters. Ice snapped branches clean. A tree somewhere cracked and fell, and the echo rolled down the hills like thunder. She didn't sleep, neither did Eli. They sat near the hearth with their backs to the stone, watching the door, listening, waiting, and just before sunrise the bells chimed. 3 rings, then silence, then a crunch in the snow, and the soft creak of boots approaching her slope. The boy didn't speak, didn't move. He just looked to Martha with wide, dark eyes and held his breath. She lowered the lantern flame till the room went dim as dusk, her own breath slow and silent. The only light now came from the hearth, low and flickering, casting their shadows tall and broken across the plank walls. The hatchet was already in her hand. The rifle, unloaded but convincing, leaned against the doorframe. The bells outside stilled, but that didn't mean they were gone. It meant they were waiting, they were watching, and they were trying to move quiet. "Basement," she whispered. Eli nodded, crawled beneath the floorboards, slipped between the hidden beams and curled into the farthest edge of the crawl space. She dropped the rug back over the hatch, then slid the bench on top of it. In the dark, it looked like nothing at all. Another footstep crunched outside. Closer this time, not on the slope, at the front, at the porch. She took one long breath, stood behind the door and waited. The knock was polite. 2 quick taps, not Jacobson's style. Then came the voice. "Miss Martha, please." It was Mrs. Peterson, weak, tired, but unmistakable. "I brought the children." Martha's grip faltered for half a second, just long enough for the memory to return. The Peterson girl, hair matted with cold, coughing so hard in church she couldn't stand. The boy with frostbitten ears wrapped in wool scarves. She opened the door a crack, just enough to see, and there they were, Mrs. Peterson in a soaked shawl, her little ones pressed against her skirt, all three of them shivering, no one else, no sound from the brush, but her neck prickled, because Martha was not a fool, and she knew a decoy when she saw one. She opened the door wider. "Get inside," she said. The woman hesitated, then rushed forward, ushering the children in. They stumbled over the threshold, cheeks raw, eyes hollow. Martha closed the door behind them and bolted it fast. Mrs. Peterson turned, lips trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then came the back crash, the pantry slope. The bells screamed, the latch groaned, boots skidded, and then silence. Martha didn't wait. She hauled the bar from the door, shoved it open, and stepped out into the wind with her lantern blazing. 3 men were crouched at the slope. Hall, Jacobson, and Harrow. They had pried the stone off. The fake floor was visible, empty, as planned. Hall was reaching in, Jacobson standing above, watching with that same smug look from before. "Thought you'd hidden it better," he said when he saw her. "But I figured even you weren't cold enough to keep kids down there." "I hid the food," she said. "Not the heart," he laughed. "Oh, well, that's fine. You can hand it over now, or we take it. Either way, you're done." The wind howled around them. Then Jacobson's face changed. He looked down. To the trap. Too late. The plank snapped. The wire pulled tight, and a small clay pot tipped over from the side of the slope, spilling ash, salt, and black powder into the entry chute. It didn't explode, but it didn't have to. It burned. A rush of fire and black smoke poured upward, catching the edge of Jacobson's coat and flaring into his sleeve. He howled, staggered back, arms flailing, and Hall dove aside with a scream. Martha raised her rifle, not to shoot, but to look like she would. "Leave, now!" Jacobson rolled in the snow, batting the flames. Hall was already running. Harrow hesitated, looked her in the eyes, chest heaving, mouth agape like he wanted to beg forgiveness. She didn't blink, and he turned and followed the others into the trees. The flames burned quick, just a scare charge meant to blind and scatter. But it had worked. The slope was safe, and so was what lay beneath it. She turned back toward the cabin. Mrs. Peterson stood in the doorway, pale, tears on her cheeks. "I didn't know," she said. "They said if I could just get you to open the door, they'd—" "I know," Martha said. "It's done." Inside, the children had already curled up near the hearth, their small bodies drawn to warmth without needing words. She closed the door behind them. For the next week, no one came near her land. No knocks, no whispers, no smoke trails from neighboring chimneys. The snow covered the tracks, buried the shame. She tended to the children quietly, washed their wounds, fed them from her stores, told stories in the dark while the wind tried and failed to press its cold into the stone walls. And Eli, he didn't sleep in the crawl space anymore. He sat by the hearth, sharpening sticks into kindling, helping without being asked. Sometimes he watched the door, other times the slope. He was different now, harder maybe, but not cruel. "You're not going back," she told him one night. He didn't argue. By February, the Harrows were gone. Jacobson, too, left their cabins behind like tombs. Word spread through the few remaining travelers that they'd gone south toward warmer valleys, leaving their shame to rot with the spoiled food they'd hoarded and the debts they'd earned. Others came to Martha, slowly. Mrs. Trudy, a quiet old man with one eye and a wagon full of broken tools. A young mother with twins and no more milk. He wasn't a boy anymore, not entirely, and he'd stopped asking if she was sending him away. That was enough. "Then go get the shovels," she said. It became a pattern. By summer, more had come. 3 more families, a handful of single men, 2 widows, a trapper with frostbitten fingers who couldn't hold a rifle anymore but could still stack stone like a mason. They didn't form a town, not officially. There were no signs, no proper name. But slowly something grew, a cluster of cabins, spaced wide. No church yet, no schoolhouse yet, but a communal fire pit where folks brought stew or salted fish. Children ran trails where wolves used to. And in the center of it all was Martha's pantry, not hidden anymore, not a secret, but not abandoned either. They didn't use it for storage now. It had served its time. It was sealed for the warm months, kept clean and cool and quiet. A few clay jars of salt and lard remained in the back, just in case, but mostly it sat like a shrine, like a reminder. They came to her for the new ones. Each family wanted their own, and she taught them, everyone, not for money, not even for trade, just with that same plain voice she'd used when Eli had asked all those winters ago. "Dig it where the sun won't touch it. Line it with rock, not just logs. 2 vent holes, not 1. Slope your ceiling or it'll drip by December. And for God's sake, never leave meat on the bottom shelf." They listened, because she'd lived it. In late June, she found herself standing with Eli on the ridge above the valley. They'd gone up to check the tree line for signs of bears, but paused as the wind picked up, and both ended up just watching. The cabins below looked smaller from up there, softer, like matchboxes pressed into the land, and yet each one had smoke rising. Each one had a sloped patch behind it now. Not every pantry was perfect, but everyone existed. That meant something. "You think it'll hold?" Eli asked. "All this?" She didn't look at him, just stared out across the hills. "If the earth holds," she said, "then so will we." He was quiet a moment. Then, "What if another storm comes?" "It will," she said. That wasn't pessimism, it was fact. Storms always come. The trick was being ready when they did. Later that summer, they held the first pantry supper. They didn't call it that at first, just a shared meal, but the name stuck because every dish brought had come from something preserved, dried, cured, pickled or smoked. No fresh harvest yet, but preserved life. That was the point. Martha sat beside the fire and watched as children carried jars. Men argued over whose beans had spoiled less, and a woman with 2 missing fingers played a mouth harp under the stars. Someone passed her a plate. She didn't ask what was in it. She didn't care. It tasted like survival. In late fall, before the first snow came, Eli finished the second pantry. It was deeper, room for 2 families' worth of goods. He'd built it with help from a boy named Jonah and a woman named Ruth, neither of whom would have spoken to each other last spring. Now they laughed like cousins. Martha stood at the threshold and tested the door. It sealed clean, tighter than her first one ever had. Eli watched her face. "Well?" he asked. She nodded. "It'll hold?" And he smiled, not like a boy, not even like a man, but like someone who knew what it meant to build something that could save a life. The first snow came lighter that year, just a warning dusting. But the pantries were ready, and so were the people. They had jars, hooks, stones and clay. They had butter crocks and vent holes and double ceilings. They had cellars beneath the frost line. And above all, they had each other. No one mocked anymore. Not the old widow, not her pantry, not the boy who once fled into the snow. Because now it wasn't her pantry, it was theirs. It was how they lived. And that story, the one that had been whispered in passing about the widow who never lost her food, was now spoken proudly around fires, told to newcomers like a legend. Except this one was true, and they all knew it. One night, just before the deep winter returned, Martha found something tucked behind her pantry door, a folded piece of canvas tied with twine. She opened it slow. Inside, a drawing, done in charcoal and boot polish, crude but careful. It showed a cabin, a slope, a woman standing tall beside a boy, both holding lanterns against a dark sky. And behind them, others, blurry, faint, but there, all holding baskets. At the bottom, in childish scrawl, someone had written, "She dug down so we could rise." Martha folded it up, pressed it between 2 stones at the back of the pantry wall, and sealed the door again. Winter came, as it always did, but this time the valley didn't brace for death. It prepared to outlast it, one pantry at a time, one fire at a time, one knock at a time, answered not with fear, but with a loaf of bread, because once they'd laughed, but now they dug, and in that earth they didn't just store food, they stored faith,